I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nations who are the custodians, owners of this magnificent land that I'm standing on, and pay my respects to elders both past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the custodians of the land and water which you may be coming today from. Let's just take a deep breath together and acknowledge my ancestors, your ancestors, and the journey that they've had to endure so that we can meet and connect here together today. So today I'm going to present a research that's about process of relationships and self-reflections, which resulted in the work that inspired my PhD and is now being implemented across daycares and preschools in New South Wales. And I invite you to take a moment and to pause this video and go grab a piece of paper, maybe some colors, textures, any art materials you may have, because you might want to doodle or draw as you're listening to me. When we create, when we engage in art, what happens is our parasympathetic nervous system is alerted, our breathing slows, our blood pressure lowers, and we are able to concentrate more and engage more with the material. So don't worry if you have or you don't have any artistic abilities, any history in doing art. Just give yourself permission to follow the materials and follow your hands. So my name is Shiri. I'm a clinical social worker and an art therapist with over 25 years of clinical experience. And I've only been in Australia for the last 15 years. I come here from overseas where trauma really was a way of life. And I started my professional journey inside bomb shelters with children and their families. And it was really there that my spark and interest in art therapy began, where I really realized that words were just not sufficient or enough to express certain experiences, certain emotions. And I've worked with Ethiopian immigrants, with Bedouins in the south of Israel, with Palestinian and Jewish social workers in conflict resolution, and many women and children who've survived different forms of trauma. And what I found across the board was that art really did fill in the gaps where words couldn't. It gave colors, it gave shapes to things that were otherwise unmentionable. And what it did is it created a bridge for me to cross and meet people from different cultures. And this may be the time to mention that I myself am the granddaughter of 4 Holocaust survivors. And really this gave me memories and experiences from very early on at how different people managed to survive traumas, to continue on with their lives, or not quite manage to. And I drew a lot of insights from my own transgenerational history. So Rachel Yehuda, who worked with Holocaust survivors, who worked with survivors of 9/11, accepts this concept called epigenetic inheritance. And what this really means is environmental influences can affect the genes of your children and even your grandchildren. This is my youngest child. This is my grandmother. There's a lot of physical similarities, but what we know is the consequences of trauma really impacts the daily living in the present. And this is so relevant when we live in Australia, when we work with colonized people. And so following a request from a preschool in southern New South Wales to support children with what they called big behaviors, children swearing, kicking, children biting, educators were really feeling at a loss. How do we deal with these children? And what we later discovered is that much of these children are really a direct result of children's either immediate trauma experiences or transgenerational experience. And so a collaboration was developed to facilitate art groups within the centers. And I'm going to share the research that led to what we now call the seasonal model, where we work with both children and educators simultaneously. And so the aim was to build confidence and capacity for educators who deal with things like this. This was a new couch. Can you see how it's ruined? How can they relate to children who've experienced trauma using the art groups? How can we help children who may be desolate, angry, reactive, build trust and offer an alternative means of communicating to enable that deeper relationship. The idea of the art groups to create that space where there would be more meaningful relationship is based on research like Maston that has shown very clearly that one of the biggest protective factors that can support children who've experienced trauma is through relationships. And when I say relationships, what I mean is one that's attuned, that's caring, that's non-judgmental, that's empathic. And that is what has been shown to help people flourish irrelevant of their past. But what happens through this research, what we actually found out on the floor is that when an educator works with a child, when they really connect, when they care, they themselves experience what is known as vicarious traumatization. And what that means is that the more the educator care, the more they understand the child, the more they are going to be affected by that child's story, to the extent that many educators feel very similar symptoms to the ones that the child is feeling. And the biggest impact on educators, other than them being exhausted, overwhelmed, sick, and burned out, is what vicarious traumatization does, is it makes it really, really difficult to connect with the children. And Lindy and Wilson did a research and they looked at the impact on therapists who work with people who've experienced trauma. And what they said is that if you work with challenging behaviors, with stress, with trauma, your empathy is going to be strained. And they use this framework of countertransference, which means how we react to what we are hearing or seeing. And on this continuum that they've created, on the one extreme is over-identification or intrusion, and then the other one is avoidance. And in the middle of that continuum is what I like to think of that good enough relationship. And good enough is a term that I've borrowed from Winnicott. But in that middle of that continuum is that attuned care. Now, how you're affected is going to depend on your life story, on your age, on your history, but you are going to be affected. And all of us slide up and down that continuum on a daily basis. So all that is to tell you that the groups we run and art in that groups can really be used to forge and create that deeper relationship, that awareness of how important these relationships are. But it's just as important that we work with the educators and directors to restore their own sense of selves. And so by doing that, we're increasing their own availability to engage with the children. And this is so vital. You know, in daycares, children spend from 6:30 in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. And so I often look at educators as if there were children surrogate carers in the school. So the research design I used was based on Ian's case study approach, and we looked at the 10 sessions as a case study, but we also looked at each group as a case. And because I was interested in documenting the process of relationships, as well as the different phases of the relationship, qualitative methodologies were used. And as I said earlier, the research took place in a preschool in the southern coast of New South Wales. And originally, I focused on the impact of the art groups that could have on the children, but seeing and understanding how the children's stories and behaviors really affected the educators, my focus shifted to support the educators so that they could sustain that good enough relationship, which we know helps break the cycle. And as you can see, children are really busy with relationships on the forefront of their mind. So practically, what do? We go in, we run a weekly art group. An educator sits alongside that art group. The group is set up in a space where the educators choose. We throw a sheet on the floor and we offer children materials that they're free to use in any which way they want. The group is an open group, so children can choose if they want to join, how long they want to join for. And this is done for a few reasons. It gives the children control and choice, which is something that they often don't have in their life. And it also gives them an opportunity to act out their attachment styles. We always start the group with hello song, in which the group members drum and sing their names into the space. And then we give them the art materials that they can use, and we end with a goodbye song. This is akin to a therapeutic framework, but what it does is it helps demarcate the group from whatever it is happening in the preschool. After the group is done, we pack up the materials, and the educators and I go into a quiet space to have reflections, to think about the group and what happened there. And this discussion really informs the next week's group, aligning with Schoen's model of action on reflection. There is a movie at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. If you want to, you can then click. It'll give you a feeling of what these groups look like. So I'm going to share you a very brief story. This is the story of Amy, who in session 3 showed this artwork to an educator with this huge look of pride on her face. And when we looked at it in reflections, we thought that the glitter glue is very transparent, you can see, and we were wondering if maybe this material that is so unseeable may communicate something to us about Amy, who's 4 years old, and how she experiences being in the world. Maybe she saw herself as transparent, unseen, unseeable. And if this is the case, this just highlights how important this idea of good enough relationship is, where she can feel seen and validated by an attentive and attuned, caring educator. This is Amy again in session 7. This shows a variation of how she used the glitter glue. She really went to great lengths. She collected all the glues and she squeezed them out to achieve that. And again, in reflection, her educator said to me, look, now that Amy's feeling more seen, she's able to squeeze from within her different colors. She also thought that maybe the squeezing was Amy's symbolic cry for more and for difficulties she may be experiencing. Now, just like Amy's artworks has changed, I just want to talk about Sharon. These are all pseudo names, who was Amy's educator. In that very first session, when Amy showed her the artwork, she was a little bit blank and she said, oh, Amy, that's lovely. If you think of our continuum, she was a bit withdrawn and not very engaged. But then she asked, as we do when children show us their artwork, do you want to tell me about that? And by asking, what happens is from that withdrawn side of the continuum, she's moving towards the more attuned, caring side of that good enough relationship. By the 8th session, Sharon was sitting, engaged, understanding, and able to identify children's change and symbolic use of their artwork. I'm going to show you just one more quick example. This is a second share session, a different educator who said, oh my God, these children make so much artwork during the day. I feel so sorry for their children, for the parents who have to pretend to care. If you see, the children's artwork hasn't changed much, but the educator's understanding of it has. Did you see Miki's artwork? She spent an hour. Do you think that she's creating her placements where she's been in life? Isn't it interesting? So when the seasonal model was implemented, it was fun. Children really used the art space to express themselves, to create more meaningful relationships. They said that they shared their stories, and these are just some of the stories that they've shared, you know, from life transitions to real trauma. Educators themselves reported more empathy that they felt towards the children. They were able to contextualize children's behaviors and then have more tolerance for them and respond very differently. And educators responded a positive shift in their own contextualization of their own vicarious traumatization and how that impacts them. To conclude, I'd like to say that it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a community to be able to educate that child. The model helps develop community around each educator so that they're not alone, feeling bleak and hopeless, but rather that they're supported in finding the hope. Thank you so much.